not really missing too much with just having one of us here at the moment. So welcome. My name is Hafiz Printer. My brother Hamid, the other half of this duo. And together we're the founders of Printer Inc. Games. It is an independent publishing company that we've just created because we like board games. We wanted to create games. And so we decided to do that. And so for today's session, what we're going to be doing is we're going to walk you through what's the process of creating your own game. And then from there, if you're interested in running a Kickstarter, what is that process? Because there's a lot that happens with creating a Kickstarter that they don't really tell you about. And having gone through it now with two, and we have a third one on the way, we can share the things that we wish we knew before we started off. And so I do see my co-host has just joined. There he is.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I was getting the technical difficulties out of the way right at the beginning.
No problem. We just did the introduction, so I'm going to throw it over to you for the breakdown of today's session.
Excellent. So the way we set everything up is first, we want to give you a sense of what it's like to actually create a game. So we're going to do that together as an engagement piece right at the beginning. And then again, this is a session about Kickstarter. So we're going to go over the three main elements of setting up a Kickstarter, which is the pre-stage, during, and then the post-campaign. So that's going to be the general outline of what we're going to be doing for today.
Now on that, we're going to be asking for your thoughts on certain things. So throughout the session, feel free to jot any of your questions into the chat box. When we post questions, add them in there as well. We'll read them out. So that way we can, at one point, we're going to be building a game together. So we'll get to that part right now.
Yeah. And sorry, if it's 1 second, I may have missed this because again, I was late trying to get everything booted up. I'm going to be moderating. When one of us is talking, the other one's going to try and moderate the chat. So we will try and answer questions as they come up in the chat itself. But if there's anything that we miss or there's something that we might want to discuss in more detail at the end, there's going to be a Q&A set for the end, and we'll keep note of the questions that maybe we didn't get a chance to answer.
Awesome. All right. So first step in creating a board game is to start with an idea. So where do ideas come from? There's a bunch of different ways in which you can develop an idea for your board game. So one of which is thinking about a movie or a book that you think would make for a fantastic game. So maybe there's a Chronicles of Narnia game somewhere around there, or parts of it that you might think are interesting. Another thing that a lot of board game designers do is they take ideas from multiple games that currently exist and they mash them up and they create something new. So if you were to take something like Settlers of Catan and Pandemic and you were to merge those two games, you would create something completely different, which could be a really cool idea. Another is thinking through theme or the mechanic you want to start with. So for something like a theme, you could have pirates or you could have zombies. Then
pirate zombies.
Yeah, there you go. The other thing you can do is think about, in games, I really like games that have an auctioning element to it. You have to bid on things. And so maybe I want to create a game about bidding and then I can come up with the idea after the fact. So you can go on either direction for that. Finally, you can just think about, is there a game that you really want to play, but it doesn't exist? So if you've been playing games with your friends, like, it'd be really cool if there was a game that took place in the Islamic medieval world, which is a game that I'm actually creating right now, and you'll see images of later on. So ideas can come from a bunch of different places. In the chat box, if you have any interesting ideas that you have for a game, feel free to add them. It's really interesting to hear the different things that people would want to create a game about. All right, this is an example of one of those things. Last year, when the pandemic hit, everything shut down, including basketball, and I'm really into basketball. You probably see there's some figurines behind me as well. So I decided I was going to create a game about basketball to scratch that itch. So this is already in production. It's in the prototyping stage, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. All right. We are going to give you a few moments to actually think through a few pieces as we create a game together. There's 4 elements for creating a game. The first one is theme, and we talked a little bit about that right beforehand. If we were to come up with a theme, a collective theme, what are different things that you would like to see in a board game? So again, right now, we're going to be asking everyone in the audience to share their thoughts in the chat box. What's an interesting thing that you would like to see be the foundation for a board game? So earlier I mentioned the Chronicles of Narnia. Oh, we're getting some in.
Oh, that was for me.
Oh, what did you put?
Dog catchers.
Dog catcher.
Game where you're a dog catcher and your goal is to get as many strays as possible. Are you going to get bitten in the behind or are you going to get that prize chihuahua?
Yeah, or it could be the flip. You could be dogs trying to run away from a dog catcher.
Or
So
dogs trying to bite mailman.
there
How
we go.
many can you get?
So we're going to pause for a moment. We're going to give you just the opportunity to jot down any other things that you would think would make for a good theme. So what are some other examples of things that you would like to see out there? We showed basketball earlier. Now we have dog catchers. You could have it on anything. I have a game over here about lawyers. So we'll get a couple of responses before we move to the next part, but what's the theme that you would like to see in a game? Or maybe you're working on one already. Moving and traveling. Yeah, there's some fantastic games that there's one called Traveling the World. Do I have it here? I have it like in the corner here. I don't know if you can see it. Mountain climbing. I actually have a friend who's launching a game on Kickstarter on mountain climbing coming up. Fitness is a good one. Architecture and travel. Travel is a popular one that's coming up. Yeah, so lots of really great ideas for themes. So we have a theme coming up. The next piece is the mechanic. How is your game played? So I mentioned earlier, auctioning is a way of playing a game. So if you think about games that you've played, what are the things that you do with them? Are you collecting things? Are you buying things? Are you moving places? So now that you've come up with a theme, what's going to be the mechanic? What's going to be the main way people are going to engage and play with this in your game? So you can add a few examples in here, and as they're coming up, we'll read them out. We'll also share current games that use those as well. And as people are thinking, Hamid, do you have any examples or any thoughts
So
for your dog catching game?
well, not the dog catching one, but you were talking about, themes. It could be pirate themed. It could be zombie themed. And I was thinking, I shouted out pirate zombies. What if a mechanic was, you are zombie pirates and you're stuck on a ship, and the mechanic is you're trying to infect as many people as possible. Like that's the main mechanism for the game, and that can be done, that can be the dynamic. Could be
So it could be collecting then. That would be the mechanic for that.
You're collecting people, or it could be a deduction game, right? Like who's the pirate zombie?
Yeah, someone
It looks a little green. Is it seasickness or something else?
So we're not getting any in the chat, so we can give some different examples of mechanics. It's good to try and play different games to get a sense of some of them. So there's set collection. So there's a game called Splendor, which is an example of that. There's hidden movement, hidden player movement. There's games called that do that. Choosing options from a scenario. There's some really good ones like that. World Council does that. There's roll-in moving, which is very standard, like the old school games like Monopoly and Snakes and Ladders or roll and move. There is deck building, which is you're gathering a bunch of different cards, and then as you use them, then it starts to make you stronger and stronger as you go along. Empire building, fantastic. Yeah, there's a lot of city building games. Yeah, and then there's, as people are moving along, they can earn points in different ways. Trivia games are out there. There's loads of different games, and there's a website down here at the bottom called Board Gameizer. You can go there, list a bunch of different mechanics. I really like auctioning games. I like area control games where you have to control different parts of the map, which can fit in well with empire building. Fantastic. So once you have your theme and you have a way of playing it, you also want to think through different constraints. What is it that players can or cannot do? So for instance, maybe you have a game where you're not actually allowed to look at your cards. The people around you can see what your cards are. Or Hamid, you and I were talking about this beforehand. You had a good idea for constraints.
Yeah, well, we're saying maybe you just have one card. One thing that we've done when we were trying to think of ways to be more creative is we'll look at a game that already exists, and from an accessibility standpoint, we'll say, well, what happens if we take something like chess, but you put it in space where there's no gravity? How would you adapt this game now that you're missing this one component? So that's, maybe not as applicable for the games that you might be creating, but it's a good way to get in that creative headspace.
Yeah. Well, coming back to this, there's different things that you can do in your game. So one is you only get one action per turn. So that's a constraint. You have to think through, if I have multiple things that I can do, what am I planning on doing? So if anyone's ever played Ticket to Ride, well, you can either pick up cards, you can place down a track. You have very limited options, but you only get to do one thing per turn. There's another game called Alhambra, which is the same thing. You can either buy something, you can put something down, you can rearrange something, or you can pick up money. And so as you're thinking about your game, what would be a constraint that you would want the players to have to deal with? Could be in regards to timing, could be in regards to how much resources they have. So these are things that you would want to think through. And finally, the victory conditions. How do you win this game? Is it the person who has the most gold? Is it the person who gets to the end first? Yeah, timing is fantastic as well for constraints. You have 30 seconds for your turn. So if you don't get through your turn, then something happens. It just moves to the next person, or you lose something. Control of an area, for instance. That's also great because it kind of sucks sometimes when you are playing a game and someone is taking like 10 minutes on their turn. So if you're thinking of different constraints, it can help move your game along. All right.
The end condition is also interesting because you can have end conditions where everyone loses. That's a big thing in cooperative games where you're trying to survive the night. So there's a game called Ravine where you're crashed on a planet, crashed in a desert island, and you're basically just trying to survive. And you can be selfish and hoard resources for yourself to see if you can make it to the end, or you can work collaboratively to see if you can all survive. But you can have a situation where everyone dies. Well, in that game, everyone dies, but everyone loses.
Yeah. So your win condition, that's something that's going to be important for your players to know. All right. You've now gone through all the previous things. You have an idea, you have a sense of how the game is going to play, you know what your players are going to do and what they have to do to win. The next stage is getting to prototypes. So the way we're going to look at this is in two different ways. The first is creating something. You want to create something known as a minimum viable product. Say you have an idea for a game. It's a card game. It's got 200 cards, different characters, all kinds of things that are going on. That's going to take you a very long time to create. What's the essence of that? Do you need to have all 200 cards, or can you do this in 20 cards and just try it out? Because it's a lot easier and it's a lot less effort to make the 20 cards and get the idea out of your head and then onto the table. So you can try it out, see what works, see what doesn't work. And the important thing is your game doesn't need to be fully finished. If you think that you're going to think through the entire thing in your head, you'll go a little bonkers. So working with a minimal viable product helps you get something started right away. The other thing about that too is you want to make sure that it is ugly. You don't want your first prototype to look like it's completely finished and polished. I mean, you had some
Yeah.
thoughts on that, right?
Yeah, so there's a design principle which for prototyping, but anything user-centered design, you want to present things to an audience and you want it to look raw. You want it to look not finished, because if you're soliciting people for feedback, if you give them something that's polished and looks like it's full, they're not going to give you any comments or feedback, because to them they're like, well, it's already done. What can I offer? Or are you going to make these changes anyways? It's just lip service in terms of saying you consulted someone. But if you give them something and it looks like just a sketch and you say, I'm thinking about doing this, what do you think? They will realize that it is still in a developmental process, and they'll actually give you more honest feedback and more full feedback as well.
So how do you now create your actual prototype? Well, the simplest way is just with paper and pen. Grab some scrap paper, grab a pencil, sketch out what your card's going to look like, sketch out a board. You can photocopy things. If you have games that are around you, you can take elements from them. So if you need a pair of dice, you don't have them, well, go to your Monopoly game, grab the dice from there, you can use it. The dollar store is also really great. You're not going to spend a lot of money, which is also important at this stage. You do not want to spend a lot of money here. And you can pick things up that can be, player tokens that you can move around, or dice or chips or whatever else. And again, it's something that you can reuse and it's cheap. If you want to go the digital element, you can create things on PowerPoint and Canva. So for a lot of our early games, we actually created the cards on PowerPoint, where each slide was a different side of the card. And then what you can do is you can print it with 6 slides per sheet, back and front. And that way you get it printed in a way where you do have backs to your cards. The other is Canva, which is a free online graphic design tool. You just log in there and you can create all kinds of things, from posters to presentations. You can also just create cards for your game on there. As mentioned before, you want this to be cheap. There's lots of free art and icons that are available online. We have a list that we're going to show you right after this. But a nice thing that's really good to know is if you do an image search on Google, in the options section, you can actually filter all the images by copyright and usage. So if you're looking for something that you want to use in the game, so maybe you're making a game about arts and you want to have some paintings. Well, you can sort through there and be like, okay, these are common use. I can use this in my game without having to worry about anything else. Now, we mentioned before, there's a whole bunch of resources and tools that are available. These are just a few where you can get free icons, free fonts, free art that you can use while creating your prototypes. The slides for today's presentation will be shared afterwards, so you'll have access to all of these. So don't worry about writing these down. And we also have a couple of examples, as mentioned before. So this is a prototype for the game I mentioned earlier, the Islamic Civilizations game. And you can see these are the cards that we created, and these were just created on PowerPoint and printed back and forth and just on different colored paper. I have a photocopied map and just paper everywhere with markings. On the right-hand side, these were created, we're creating a game, which is actually an auction game. I mentioned I like those, called Museum, where you're playing as different curators fighting one another to try and get artifacts for your museum so you can get the most visitors. So over here, we just created these on Canva. Very simple. You can tell the art style is a bit different. That's okay. Your whole thing doesn't need to look cohesive to start off with. Again, it's meant to be ugly. It's meant to be something that you're going to tweak and modify as you move along. That brings us to play testing. Now, you want to make sure that you're playing this game with other people. You want to share this idea. And the reason for that is you're going to get lots of different points of view from different people. You're going to get lots of feedback. If you only ever play with your parents or your close family or your friends, they love you. They're going to be like, this is great. Whatever you do is going to be fantastic. If you play with other people, someone's going to be like, I really don't like this, but maybe you can change it in this way. Most people tend not to share their ideas because there's this worry of one, being judged, and two, someone might steal your idea. I can tell you right now, most people are way too concerned with their own ideas to want to take yours on. And it's also a lot of work to create a game. So if you have an idea out there, it's actually better to put it out, because then if anyone does try and take it, the board gaming community is actually really supportive and open. Someone will call them out for taking your idea. So it's a good thing to share widely. Yeah.
Plus, you mentioned it is a lot of work, right? So if you're putting something out, if someone really wants to steal it, that's a lot of work that they have to put into doing it. And if you think about stuff that you want to do in your life normally just for yours, when was the last time you exercised? Any of you, right? You know you should do it. You know it's good for you. I haven't done it in a long time. I doubt you have either. If someone's going to steal your game, like, they have to have a lot of intention and motivation to do so. And then if that does happen, as Afis mentioned, they're going to get called out because you have proof if you put it up on Facebook or if you put it up in other places saying, you know, I had this idea first.
Yeah, and these are great places to share with others. In fact, we're going to get you to share right now in the chat just to get over this, fear of keeping it to yourself. If you have an idea for a game, even if it's just a small idea, put it in the chat. Put it in the chat. We want to hear about it. So once you've created your prototype, you have your idea, you start to share with other people. You're going to start something called play testing, which is you're playing the game with people, but it's very purposeful. When you're playing with other people, you want to get a better sense of how does your game play? Is it fun? Are things confusing? And so what you want is to maybe assign people during the game to take on a particular role. I want you, Hamid, to try and play as that one character that bullies the other people around. I want you, Danish, to play as that player who is going to hoard all the resources, and get people to talk out loud as they're making their decisions. Pay attention to body language. You can tell when people are interested in things, that they're not interested in things, how they react to certain pieces of your game. And afterwards, you also want to have a series of questions that you can ask them. So as you're playing the game, the first few times you'll play generally, and then as you start making modifications and tweaking the game, you're focusing your questions on those specific things. We introduced a new character. How did you find it? Did it unbalance your game? Other things to ask are, is there anything that was unclear as you were playing the game? Were there certain things that you wanted to do, but you didn't feel like you were able to? Did you feel that your choices had meaning in the game? What was your favorite part of the game? These are questions that you can ask to draw out from the people who are playing. What are the things that are working well, and what are the things that you can improve?
One of the big one of the big things that you always want to ask yourself is, like, what makes me happy about this? Because you never want to run a game and think of the games that you play that bring you joy. What element is causing that from your game, and can you expand on that? And then you would also mention soliciting this feedback and having questions to ask people before and after, but you can also do that during. You can change up things on the fly. So we were actually playtesting Hafiz's game, and she's going to show you later. And in the game, there's a card that's specific to each player that's in the deck that randomly comes out. And everyone kept pulling the card that was mine right before my turn. So I could never get it. It kept getting reshuffled. And I was like, this sucks, because I want to be able to use this one card, and just randomly it happens that everyone else is managing to pull this card. It gets randomly reshuffled back in. I can't use it. And I mentioned that to Afis, where I'm like, I am not having as much fun as I could because I'm having this thing taken away from me. And we made changes right then and there.
Yeah, we changed it up. So then we just gave everyone their advantage off the bat, and it worked really well. Now there was more strategy in the game, and that's what the newer version has in it. Now, not all feedback is going to be good like that. Some
Yeah,
feedback's not going to be great at all. I was
yeah.
running.
Take a look at the guy. Sorry, take a look at the guy in the slides. He's
Yeah,
not pleased at all.
he's not. He's very upset. So not all feedback is going to be helpful. You need to be able to parse out the good feedback from the bad feedback. If you're playing with multiple people, you'll see certain trends coming out. You also want to know who you're playing with. So board games are like movies. You can say you like movies, but people like different genres of movies. So, and some genres some people like and they don't work well for others. If you like political thrillers, that may not be something that you want to show at a kid's birthday party, right? And so I was playtesting this game with someone who created a 3 hour long hardcore history game. My game is history based, but it's supposed to be a short, light strategy game that takes 45 minutes to 60 minutes. And so we play the game, and all of his feedback was trying to push my game in the direction to turn it into a 3 hour heavy history game, which is not what I wanted. So that's feedback that I'm really not going to use. On the flip side of it, you'll get feedback from people that'll say, maybe you should change this. But there's a saying in marketing and business and all these other things called "kill your darlings," which essentially means you're very much attached to some of your ideas, but sometimes you'll get in the way of creating a better game by holding on to them. So sometimes you may really like something. You may be like, this is a really cool idea, but if you're hearing back from people over and over again that this does not work, you may need to just remove that. It's not a knock on you. It's about trying to make the game as good as possible. So you also need to have a little bit of a thick skin as you're playtesting. It's not personal. It is just about what's going to make people want to play your game more. And at the end of the day, that's what you want. You want a game that people are going to come back to over and over again. We have an example of one that we were working on. Hamid, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so there's an example in the chat, and serendipitously, we had a slide about it. So, I mean, the comment was mine, a game about animation studios. So, Fisa and I are both huge animation fans, and we thought, it would be cool if you could play a game where you were actually running an animation studio. So, we made a prototype, which you can see here is fairly raw. It was just on paper, some drawings. We used M&Ms as tokens. You can see there's some buildings there that are just, childlike houses. So we started playing it, and it was not good. We had a certain idea of how things were going to work. As we were playing it out, we realized that it wasn't fun. It was tedious. It was hard to do what we had set up to do. And so we scrapped it and we revamped, and we talked about, is there a way that we can streamline this? What are components that we want to keep? What are components that we can get rid of? Now, we had done this just on our own because we weren't at the point where we were bringing in other people. But, once you do make those changes, it's good to bring in other people, as Afis mentioned, because you get different audience opinions and views. The nice thing, though, is you can see we don't have that many components there, and the ones that are there are fairly sparse. So we didn't sink in a lot of time into actually making this, versus if, in the example Afis gave of, if your game has 200 cards, if I'd actually sat there and drawn out 300 cards and then made a whole bunch of other ones, that's a lot of sunken time and effort that's lost. Versus, again, you can see right there, we have just blank cards. The one that Afis's mouse is over right now, just a sound, which was the sound department. I could literally throw that out today and not feel bad about having put any work into it, which is what you want for a prototype. You want it to be serviceable, but you also don't want it to be something where, a lot of time and investment has gone in, because there's going to be changes based off of it.
Yeah, it needs to be adaptable. If you spent hours and hours and hours creating all the art, you're less likely to want to change your game up as a result of that as well.
Yeah.
So,
And this example as well, like we know we want to make an animation one, but we wouldn't be able to use, the characters that we love and grew up with, which are the ones that we used in the example. And you can see the pictures there. So these were just placeholder pieces that we put in because they're familiar. And then, our intention is later on to come up with 1930s looking animation characters that fall into the same model as some of these characters. So, I mean, we can't use these ones because we get sued. It was just placeholder for us in the meantime.
yeah. And so this is one thing to also keep in mind, which is you're going to be creating games and sometimes they may not work. That's okay. It's all right to shelve games. We probably have 4 or 5 games that we just shelved. Don't throw things out. As you work on new games, as you engage with new games, play more games, you may come up with a way to revisit something. And so we go back to our old games all the time and we just pull things out and we're like, oh, this was actually interesting. I wonder why we did it this way. We should change it to do it this way. So there's a couple of games that we're working on that are at various levels of development that we had to put on hold for several months, some of them even over a year.
Yeah,
Now
it's
that
like writing. Sorry, I was just going to say it's like writing. You have your rough drafts, and then you have different iterations, and then eventually you'll have a nice finished product, which is a nice segue into the rule books where you're actually going to have text.
Yeah, you need to have a rule book. This is the entry point into your game. It's the first entry point people have, and it's also the first barrier people have to your game. We want to get them to this point where they're just having fun. And if you told people, hey, you're going to have an hour's worth of fun, but first you have to read this instructional document, most people would be like, no, thank you. So your rule book is very important because you don't want this to frustrate people. You want them to be able to get into your game as quickly as possible. Now, there's an anatomy to rule books, just to make sure that they're clear, easy to follow. This is it over here. You start off with your title, who's it for, how long is it going to be. You can do a little bit of world building, what's going on at this period in time, who are you as a player, the components list so people know they're not missing anything, your setup, and then the key things. Start with it, have really early on the aim of the game. People want to know what are you doing as you're playing the game. Break down how you play around, explain the different actions in the game. At the end, people really want to know and very clearly know what the scoring is. And then if you have any additional rules, you can include that there.
Yeah,
Now,
clear. Sorry, I
sorry,
was just going to say clarity is key because you don't want your players to be frustrated or lost while they're playing. Do you mind? There's a really lame joke. Is it okay if I tell it now, Feast?
yeah, go
I
for it.
don't. So there's this joke where an engineer's wife asks him to go to the market to get some eggs, and she says, "If there, oh sorry, to buy some bread," and she says, "If there's eggs, get a dozen." And so he comes back and he has a dozen loaves of bread, and she said, "Why do you have so much bread?" And he said, "Oh, because they had eggs." So your understanding of what the rules are may be clear to you, but you do want to run through that playtest process. You want to you want to make sure. Yeah, that's a really lame joke. You want to make sure that the people who are going to be going over everything understand clearly what they should do, and you want to make sure that that understanding is universal.
Generally, you've been sitting with this game for months, maybe even years. You know this really well. It's in your head. Other people might not. And so your rule book is a way to get people to understand how to play the game. There's a bunch of things that you can do to make it very to improve your rules. First off, get other people to read them. Have them read it, have it explained, have them lead and run the game for you and see where are the different mistakes. Where is there a lack of clarity? Where would examples be helpful? Images are fantastic for getting ideas across. So if I am not supposed to be able to hop over a spot on the board, maybe there's an image in the rule book that shows that. So rule books are very important. We have a link that we'll share later on as well. Just talks about how can you make better rule books. You want to be organized if you're going to be creating board games. There's nothing worse than having bits of paper all over the place and then you're looking for something and you can't find it. We highly recommend go set up a Google Drive or a Dropbox where you can organize and store everything. We just spoke about rule books. You're going to have multiple versions of rule books. I think I'm on version 12 of the Islamic civilizations game at the moment. Label each different version. That way, if you need to go back to revisit anything, you can do that. Sometimes you may scrap an idea and then 3 versions down the line, like, oh, maybe I should bring that idea back. That way you can keep track of it. Feedback is another thing that you want to hold on to. So if you have a document where all of that is stored online, the questions you're planning on asking, the changes that you've made to the game based on feedback, then you can always go back, revisit that again, make sure that in the title you've listed the dates on there. Art's going to be important too. So if you do decide that you want to take this to a place where it's going to become a real game, you can keep a breakdown of here's art that I really like. Here's the vibe that I want to get for the game. Here's inspiration. Also, when you're working on games, you'll probably come up with ideas for other games. We've shown you a few prototypes we've worked on. Those tend to pop up as we're currently working on things. Don't lose track of those. Set up a document, just jot down different ideas. It could be a one-liner, that's fine. Another key thing is the reflective element of this. Keep a designer journal. Keep a record of everything that you're doing from when you started with the idea to as you were trying different things out, aha moments you had, things that you tried, improvements you made. This will help you track your own growth. But the other nice thing is when you move to a space, if you do decide to launch this, this is content that you can share with people. People like to see the behind the scenes of what takes place. Just like in a movie, when you can see the bloopers that were there or that how to and the making of, this is your making of your game. And people really are interested in this. Finally, your planning documents. Again, if you're going to be going to Kickstarter, here's a really good place to store your budget, to store any invoices you're getting, keeping a record of people you want to reach out to review, and so forth. So before we shift over, we do want to know from the people who are on our session right now, How many of you are interested in self-publishing? So maybe going to Kickstarter, maybe approaching a publisher to make a game for you, or you just want to make a game and have a copy for yourself. So we'll pause for a moment in the chat box. If you can just write, do you plan on going to Kickstarter? You want to just get your game out there, have someone else take care of it for you, or just want your own personal version of the game? And so
if you feel more comfortable as well, depending on which platform you are, there's reactions in Zoom, so you can also give us a thumbs up if you like as well. So how can one develop a reward system to get more points, to get to the next level, or learn something additional to make it more interesting? I'm just reading out some of the comments. Is it better if do you want me to copy these and hold on to them for the Q&A afterwards, or do you want to take care of these now?
Hold ones that are outside of this question, then we'll keep for the Q&A. I just want to see specifically for this one right now. So some people are thinking of doing it personally and then going to Kickstarter. Someone has an idea for a Kickstarter party game. Oh, Desi Bridal inside jokes could be very interesting. Someone just wants their own personal version. There's other people that are planning on creating something and maybe down the line they're going to be doing it. So if you're planning, you just want a copy of your own game, then there's places online that do print on demand. There's one that's really great called the Game Crafter that you can upload your own art, everything that you've created for your game. You can have them print a copy or multiple copies and ship it to you. And then you can have your own version of a game at home. It's substantially cheaper than trying to mass produce. For those of you who want more people to play the game, but you don't want to go the Kickstarter route, you can actually pitch to publishers. There's something called a sell sheet. So if you ever looked at the back of a box and it gives you all the descriptions of what the game is about, how it plays and everything else, I'm just gonna hold this one up real quick. That's essentially what a sell sheet is. It's the how many players, how does the game work, who's involved, who's it aimed for. And if you create something like that, you can actually reach out to publishers. Many of them have events. You can go to their websites. Some of the larger ones are Asmodee, Simon. There's also smaller ones, Lucky Duck Games. You can reach out to us if you're interested as well. So Printer Ink Games. We'll share our email address at the end. And that way, if you just want to design, you don't have to take care of everything else. You can do that. Then if you want to do the Kickstarter route, we're going to be coming to that for the next little bit to walk through everything you now need to know to launch a Kickstarter. So we see that in there. Can you please speak a little bit about that? The whole next section is going to be setting you up for that. If you're planning on self-publishing, which is going on the Kickstarter route, that means you are now running a business. You are allowed to pick two of the following three things in that case. You can have money, control, or time. You're not allowed to have all three. So talking about each one of those, if you don't have a lot of time, that means you have money and control. You can spend money to have other people take care of things for you. Now, if you have a lot of time and not a lot of money, you can take the other route. You can slowly start building up organically a crowd behind you. Now, for crowdfunding, 80% of your funding is going to be coming from people you bring in. 20% will come from Kickstarter organically. So that's going to be very important. Now, if you, and this is about the control part, you may not be good at certain things. I am not good with art or graphic design. Hamid is. I'm good at coming up with random rules and designs for the game's actual mechanic. So the two of us together work in a way where we will bounce ideas off one another. He takes care of the art. I take care of some of the back end pieces. You also want to be consistent. If this is a business, how would you treat a business? Set time aside every week for you to work on this, even if it's something small, even if it's going out to read articles, which is the next part. Do your research.
Yeah. Just really, really quick. If you take an hour a day, an hour is less than 5% of your day. So you can devote an hour potentially to, putting aside each day or every couple of days to just work on this. And if you think of it in that aspect, it's not that much time. And then, you'll think past versions of you when you're further along and you're like, oh man, I wish I had this done. There's been a lot of times where we've created files where we've done alternative things. And then later on, we're like, oh, can we do this? I'm like, oh, past to me, it's already made this. And then you're like patting yourself on the back.
So there's a few places where you can reach out and get this information. There's a fellow named Jamie Stagmeyer who runs Stonemaier Games. They've done Wingspan and Sith and a whole bunch of other games. He's got a whole section on his website called Kickstarter Lessons that walks through anything and everything you need to know. There's another one called Brendan, the Board Game Dev. There's a podcast called the Board Game Design Lab. There's another one called Crowdfunding Nerds. We're actually working on a podcast right now where we talk you through week by week from start to finish. How do you take a game from the idea through to publishing and post, where we talk to game designers. And so there's lots that's out there that can help you as you go through this. Now, the timeline that it takes to market your game. This isn't creating the game. This is now marketing your game for a Kickstarter. This is the suggested timeline. You don't want to think to yourself, I'm going to launch something in 3 months. That's not enough time for you to get everything you need to know done. You need to create a project plan roughly a year out. More is better. Then you're going to start reaching out to artists. We'll talk about what that looks like in a moment. You need to start marketing early. The larger the crowd you bring, the better and more likely you are to succeed in funding. I mentioned that my game is coming out. I'm not launching for 9 months. I'm spending the next 9 months working on building a crowd. The game is done. That part was finished. But the next part is, if people don't know this thing exists, they don't know that they want it. You want to start reaching out to manufacturers and shipping to figure out what your costs are going to be. Then you're going to start trying to build up that social proof before you, again, push it out, make people aware, and then launch. All throughout this, you are raising awareness and play testing. Artists. How do you find an artist for the game? So there's a bunch of different ways to do that. You can look on Instagram. I found my artists through Instagram. You want to look for people that don't have a huge following. That means that they're going to be cheaper. My guy had, I think, 2,000 followers when I first had him. I think he's up to 20,000 now. Hamid's working with someone for his current Kickstarter, who has, I think, 52,000, but you just reached out to a new artist who I think has around just under 10,000, right, Hamid?
Yeah, so he's going to be doing some extra pieces for me, and he has a pretty good style.
Yeah.
One thing that's just not on the list that I want to mention as well, if you have friends or family that are at universities that are art focused, like OCAD, Sheridan, and they can connect you with students, and a lot of those places will also have student showcases. That's another great way that you can connect with younger artists that will more likely do it at a cheaper price because they're still building their portfolios.
Yeah. You can also look at games that are already out there and look up their artists. They'll list the artists on the box in the rule book, or you can go to the Board Game Geek website and you can look up games and you can see who their artists are. So I ended up doing that and reaching out to a few established artists before I landed on the one that I used for my current game. When you're reaching out to artists, there's a few things that you want to reach out to beforehand. So let them know that you're looking for a quote. Tell them a little bit about your game, its theme, its setting, so they can get a sense, is this for them or not? And then you want to also tell them what you want to get done. If you only want to get one card done, they may not be interested. But you want to tell them, this is a full board game. I need cards. I need a box. I might need some promotional art to use on my Kickstarter or to use as posters, to give them a sense of, okay, what is that? Can you give me costings for each of these? Also give them a time frame. If you're planning on launching your Kickstarter in 4 months and you tell them that you want the art done in a month, that might not work for some. It might work for others. So let them know, hey, I'm working on a Kickstarter. I'm planning on launching in 6 months. Would you be able to complete the following things by month 4, month 5? And then they can let you know. You don't have to worry about getting all your art done for your Kickstarter, but it's a good idea to get most of it done. Also, if there's certain styles that you like for your game, create a board, a vision board. Send them examples of things. And then, again, ask them for their rates. Finally, make sure there's a contract. Once you decide on someone, you want to have a contract. You can ask them if they have one, or you can have one. Hamid has an example that if you would like, we can share after the fact, after the session. That should list who owns the art. It should be you, how the payment will work, the number of revisions you get, what communication is going to look like. This is to help both of you stay on track. I don't have a contract with my artist, and it's very difficult to get in touch with him. So it takes me a while to get my art. I'm getting it from him, but it's been slowing down the progress that I need to do things like creating a landing page.
Yeah. Whereas with my artist, we have a contract and we have a schedule for how we're keeping communication. So I've communicated with him through Discord, through emails. We even had a video call now and then. But costing was a question that came up in the chat. And Afis, you're going to go over some of that now.
Yeah. And so generally, the costs that you're going to be paying for things, it gets a little bit hefty. So for cards, you're looking between $120 to $200 per card. And this is an example of one that we have from our game. It depends on the complexity and what you're asking them for. The board itself will cost between $300 to $500, and the box is going to cost between $400 to $800. Now, that's going to depend on, again, how complex it's going to be, how big the board is, how big the box is, if you're getting them to do the sides and the back. When you are doing when you're working with the artist, you want to ask them, to use a particular kind of formatting when they're creating their art. It needs to be a minimum of 350 dots per inch, because that is going to give you the quality you need when it's being printed. You also don't want them to use a standard red, green, blue color palette. You need them to use the CYMK. So this is the cyan, magenta, I forget the other ones, but they'll know what that is. And that's for when you're printing, your manufacturer will request all things come in that way. Finally, your artist is not your graphic designer. So graphic designers and artists are two different things. Art is subjective. You can like something, you cannot like something. Graphic design is objective. You need to be able to clearly get ideas across. So things like icons, things like fonts, the layouts of your rulebook, the layouts of your cards, these are all things the graphic designer will do. Some artists are both artists and graphic designers, so you can ask them to take care of some of these things, but otherwise you would need to reach out to a graphic designer to take care of some of this, or if you know someone in the family or you can do it yourself, you would take care of that. Manufacturing. Manufacturing is expensive and there's a lot. There's a bunch of different companies out there, but if you try and Google board game manufacturing, odds are you're just going to come up to Panda. Panda is great, except they are expensive and they require that you have a larger minimum order quantity, or MOQ. These are a whole bunch of other companies that are out there that we've reached out to. You want to reach out to as many companies as possible to get the best quote possible for your game. You also want to know how many copies you're planning on printing. A small print run, so Gameland will do 500 copies, might be better for you than trying to print 2,500, and now you're left over with 2,000 copies that you have to store in a warehouse. You have to deal with shipping and all these different things. For Hamid's game, he's going to be going with. Do I have one?
Yep, the photo, they're right at the top.
Oh, right over here. If you go to their websites, a lot of them will have breakdowns of where you can get templates, like the one we showed in the previous slide. They'll have a breakdown of what their costing looks like. You can set up a meeting, so you can have a conversation with them, show them things that you want to have, ideas you have, ways you can save money. You also want to have a list of every component that is going to be in your game. And you need to be specific about these things. So you can say, hey, I want 10 cards. Okay, what size are the cards? What quality do you want the cards to be? How thick are the cards? What's the card finish? These are all things that you need to share with them beforehand, because it's going to change the cost. Where do you find all that information? Well, I do highly recommend going to Panda's website. They are the more high-end one. On there, you'll get a lot of information. They have tools that you can download. They have templates that you can download. In fact, most of them will. Longpack, Boda all have those as well. So go to the set, go to them, check them out, see what's there, educate yourself on those pieces first, and reach out to as many as possible to find the best deal. I had a conversation yesterday. Yep.
Sorry, I was just going to say most of them also show past work that they've done. So you can see, well, oh, Panda's worked on this game that I'm familiar with, or Longpack did this one, and you get a better sense of quality if maybe that's a game that you've owned or seen before. But sorry, go on.
You know what, we'll shift from the manufacturer, but one point that I do want to bring up is around budget. So I mentioned before, this is like a business. You can think of it almost like a hobby. How much money would you spend on a hobby throughout the year? Would it be $1,000, $2,000? Because you need to think through how much all of these different pieces are going to cost, and how much would you be willing to lose as we go along. And we'll touch on that in a moment. Not to say you would lose anything, but you do want to keep a sense of how much money is going to be. For manufacturing, generally what happens is you put 50% down to sign the contract, 30 to 50%, and then another 50, the final bit at the end of your contract when they're producing for you. That would be after your Kickstarter. This is an example from Panda, and you can see there's very specific things. 300 for the paper quality, it's blue core. Their costing was very expensive. This is for 1,500. They don't do 1,500 anymore. They do a minimum of 2,500 cards. Another one that we went to, this is What's Games. And you can see there's an economy of scale. The more you order, the cheaper it gets as you go along. So this is a way better deal at 500 than the other one was at 15. You may pay a little bit more if you're producing less, but overall you'll save more money. Now, funding. There's different things that you need to think of when you're coming up with the funding that you're going to put on your Kickstarter page, the funding goal. So once you've reached out to manufacturers, you'll know how much it's going to cost for the number of units you're going to order. So generally what you want to do, the markup is between 3 times to 8 times the cost of what it is. If it costs you $10, you should probably sell the game you can sell it between 30 to 80. Generally, people are going to base how much they think your thing is worth on its perceived value. If yours is a game that's got a board, some cards, and some dice, No one is going to pay $80 for that. Standard for a game that's like that is between $30 to $40. The best range to be in, and the ones that are most successful on Kickstarter, are the ones that are between 25 to 50, unless you're going all out and you have miniatures and you have all these expansions and it's a massive game. When you're coming up with your funding goal, you are not including your sunken costs. If anything, you want to just include what your manufacturing costs are. There's a few reasons for that. One is you want to try and fund as quickly as possible. Those campaigns that fund early, the Kickstarter algorithm picks up, and people like to back a winner. They like to see, oh, I'm going to actually get this game. The majority of your funding in a campaign come within the first 48 hours and the final 48 hours of your campaign. You want to make sure you hit that because it's going to help you with marketing. So anything like arts, the money that you put in for your prototypes, for videos, things like that, you're going to be making up through stretch goals. Stretch goals are things that you're going to add to your game once you reach additional funding. And so maybe you're going to add a new card. And so if you raise an extra $300 or $400, you're going to add a new card to the game. Well, it might only cost you $150. So the rest is profit that you bring in to help subsidize what you're going to do. When you're thinking of your Kickstarter, you also want to think of it in 3 different scenarios so you're prepared for all 3. What happens if you don't fund? What happens if you just fund? And what happens if you overfund? If you do really well, and Hamid contributed on a campaign in February where the funding goal was $3,000. They ended up making $144,000. They were like, when we were sitting with Carl, we were coming up like with stretch goals, trying to figure out what to include next, like almost daily. It was crazy. And so you want to be able to pre-plan a lot of these things out. Shipping and fulfillment. This is something that there's very, very few articles out that really give good information. You want to reach out to different shipping and fulfillment companies, Spiral Galaxy, Quartermaster Logistics,
Easy Ship.
Easy Ship. These are all Nord Games. These are all examples of shipping and fulfillment companies. Once your game is produced, then you need to be able to get it to your backers. And so what you want to do is reach out to them just like you would your manufacturers, get different costings, see what's going to be the best rate for you. You want to ask questions about taxes. So if you're shipping to the UK, which now because of Brexit is a whole mess with their VAT, if you're shipping to Europe, if you're shipping to Australia, you're going to have to deal with VAT, the value added tax. If you're doing a campaign for the first time around, try and do something small. The cost for manufacturing something card-based that's small is a quarter to a third of what you pay for a regular board game. It's going to reduce your costs substantially. You may also want to consider just shipping to North America, because that means it's just one ship coming from China where your game is produced to one fulfillment company who will then send it out from there centrally. Versus reaching out to all these different places, you may need to have separate fulfillment companies, separate shipping, and all these other things that go along with that. Talk to your fulfillment center. Tell them, hey, I want this to be global. How do I do that? How do I get friendly shipping? If you're going to be the one paying the tax, you can add a logo onto your campaign saying, this is going to be friendly shipping. You do not have to pay anything extra when this game comes to your door. You just need to pay what happens on the Kickstarter, and then you'll get the game. That's a selling point, and a lot of international backers look for that first before they decide to back. But if you're starting off, you could just do a North American only launch. Awareness and community building. Again, if no one knows about your game, then they won't know that they want it. There's a few things you can do to build up awareness. Create a Facebook group. This is a place where you can direct people and they can get updates about what's going on. A landing page is also important. A landing page is just a simple welcome page on the internet. You go there, here's a bit of information about the game. Here's a space where you can give me your email address. If they can give you their email address, they're saying, I'm giving you the right to communicate with me. Generally, 10 to 15% of people on your email list will convert during your Kickstarter. So if you need 300 backers, you would aim to get around 2,000 to 3,000 people following. MailChimp is a fantastic tool for this. It's free up to 2,000 people. You can create a free landing page on there. So I highly recommend that. Take part in board game contests. There's a website called Cardboard Edison. They list a whole bunch of different contests that are out there. You'll get good feedback. It also gets people in the world out there saying, hey, this is a cool game. And if you get really good feedback or possibly win, you can use that to promote. Playtesting is another great thing. If you're playtesting the game with other people, they might like the game and they can be like, hey, if you're interested, we have a landing page. You can go sign up and get more details on that. You want to be part of the board game community. There's loads of board game uh, Facebook groups and Discord groups where you can just go hang out, talk about games, and then you can drop in, hey, I have a game coming, by the way. You don't want to just show up and be like, I have a game, drop the link and leave, because it's going to come off as spammy. Spend some time, make some friends, focus on different social medias, but don't worry about focusing on all of them. If you just want to do Facebook, that's okay. If you want to focus on Instagram, that's okay. Make a list of your friends and family. We did this before Hamid's launch. Make a list of everyone, write down whether they would be able to either promote for you, drop $1 for you, because that's going to help with the algorithm, or possibly back the entire thing. And then make sure you reach out to them well before your launch. Let them know how important it is for them to do it on the first day, and that will give you a big boost. You also want to know your audience and direct it at them. If your game is a horror game, you may not want to direct that towards families, because they may not want that. You're just going to be spending time, energy, and money on the wrong thing. Speaking of money, Facebook ads. Instagram is a good place to get followers. Facebook is a good place to get people who buy. Facebook ads are probably one of the most effective ways to get people to come to your campaign, and it's relatively cheap. So this is a good space to spend money, probably a month beforehand and the day of, to drive people towards your landing page and then your actual page as is. Kickstarter also introduced something recently in the last few months where you can set up a Kickstarter preview page. Here, you can just put up a bit of information about your game and people can click to follow it, but they already have to have a Kickstarter page or a Kickstarter account to be able to follow. So those people will convert, and again, the rate is around 10 to 15%. There's also different conventions, Protospiel, Breakout Con, Unpub, for game designers who are trying to work on publishing a game. Most of these are free, they're online currently, so you can go and you can raise awareness about your game there. Being part of the community, I was playtesting, so this is the game that you saw the earlier prototype for. This is where it's at right now. I apologize, I'm rushing a little bit because we do want to get to Hamid to show the back end. Here's feedback from the game from a contest as well. I can copy and paste this to send to people if they want to know about the game, and it just speaks really nicely about it. And we got a good score as well. Social proofs, generally, there's certain things you want to have on your page so people trust you. You don't want it to look like it's just something that was thrown together. Hamid will walk you through that in a moment. And with that, I'm actually going to just hand it over to you. And Hamid, I apologize for echoing a bit into your time.
So what we'll do is I'm just going to share my screen really quickly so that we can show you generally some of the elements that Hafisa talked about, and then all the information that I wish I had known when I was starting mine. So this is my page. I'm just going to walk you through it really quickly so you can see how it's been set up. So as you come down, there's a section where I clearly outline what the project is. It was hard. So this is a Dungeons & Dragons project. It's cards that supplement the game. Dungeons & Dragons is a game that you play where you're in a fantasy world and it's more imaginative role playing. So these are just aids that you can have. It was hard finding broken magic items. It takes place in a fantasy world. So we made our own that have humorous effects for your players. I quickly show off some of the artwork. So as soon as you come down on the page, you see this nice big orb. You see some of the artwork. I have a quote from my artist who's fairly well known. So this lets people know that he's working on the page. And it also, I think, is funny. I don't know who did this art, but that person must be insanely handsome and talented. We have a breakdown of the card so people know what they're getting. Why is this different than anything else? Multiple uses. And then we have a section where you can download a free card. On the page, it's a little bit smaller in terms of being able to see everything. So we included a higher res version that people could download because who doesn't like getting free stuff? From there, that translates into, okay, well, what are these cards? They're broken by category and they're color coded. And then here's a listing of everything that you get. So the reason we did it this way is because when you look at it like this, you can see that there's a lot of stuff. But me, as someone that might be interested in buying it, I don't know what these items are just by looking at the name. So we took that into consideration. As soon as you go down, we feature some of the art a little bit bigger with an example of what one of the items are. You get a quick description as well as an in-game, if you're using this in your games, how does it work? So people can get a taste. And then we have a full compendium. So you can click there. It brings you to a page that looks like this. And I have short summaries of each of the different items. I'm showcasing some artwork that maybe isn't on the page or is only partially on the page. And that way people get that added value. They understand exactly what they're getting. This is all the base stuff that you get because we have different tiers. when you're playing the game, there's one person who's in charge of everything. And I find that there's a lot of extra things that I need to track. And so I came up with tools that make that process a lot easier if you're running those. And they're called Game Master tools. I show an example of one and it's broken down. I let them know what other ones they're going to get. And if you get that higher tier version, you also get this included as well as digital copies. So that's added value for whoever may want this. They get everything in digital format, regular format, and they get these extra cards. And I say 15 plus, it's most likely going to be 25. So for a 52 deck, that's almost 50% more stuff. Now, as you come down, we also want to feature that ours is more unique than other ones. It comes in a box that is shaped like a book that you can actually open. So Fis is demonstrating one there. So that is something else that makes this unique. And then we have a reward. So when people are coming to a page, we do have rewards on the side over here, but people like a visual representation. So over here, I have a listing of what everything is. I have iconography off to the side so they can quickly see what they're getting, Canadian versus US prices, because it shows up as the Canadian price for anyone who's looking at it. So for any US backers, they can say, oh, this is actually cheaper. And then they can also see the difference between, okay, well, the base deck, I only get this. Look at everything I'm getting here just in terms of the line and the icons. We have additional ones where you can get multiple copies based off of, if you want 2 or 4 copies, you save money if you're doing it. So it just makes it easier if someone wants to get more. And then finally, if you come down, you have stretch goals. So as you if you hit your funding goal and you're making more money, whoever's backing expects you to add more stuff to the deck. So here we have additional cards that we've added. And again, that just makes it more attractive, one, to them as backers to retain them, but then also for people that might be joining. So I'm going to go to the top of the page where you can see I said we have an additional plus 37 unlocked. We have a banner that says funded, and that again acts as social proof for people can then see this is available. It's 3 o'clock now. I can't see the chat, but are we able to?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, just show the back end part of it.
Okay, so what we'll do is the back end is the stuff that I was interested in learning how to do beforehand. So I may rush through this as well, but Fis and I are both available to reach out to you after the session. So if you're starting a project, Kickstarter makes it really easy. Click Start a Project, click here, you answer 3 questions just to make sure that they know that you agree to their terms and conditions. Then it brings you to a page that looks like this. Basic information, rewards, story, people, payment. Basic information is the main info that you're going to show off. So what's the name of your project? What's your cover image? If you have a video, you can upload that there as well. So you can see I have my title over here, a quick subtitle. What category does it fall into? I have my main image. So you can see this is a little more polished than the book that was listed below as a concept art. Our video, you have an option to add captions if you want accessibility. And this is also where you're going to mark down what your funding limit is. So sections like this, you don't have to fill out completely. It's like when you're filling out an online form where you can save drafts, and then when you're ready, you can officially publish it. If you come to the top, you can look at the different sections. Rewards, it's literally just a button that you click that says add reward. You type in what you want. Story is the main section that we just showed you on my page, where you can include information. Now you can type in what you like and they give you options to create headings, bold, link items. I chose to make everything in picture form because it just looks better and I have a little more control over what people see. You can link items. So I mentioned you can click on certain buttons to get access to either the compendium or card. So that makes it really easy, but you could come in here and you can just say, hello, make sure it's spelled correctly, and you can just type in your information. So it doesn't have to be in pictorial form. And my earlier version was literally just a breakdown and notes to myself, what goes in this section, what goes here. When you're done, you can click view to get a preview to see what it looks like. You already saw what it looked like on my page, and you can click save if you're happy with that. Finally, people is just, this links your information. And if you're working with a collaborator, payment is really important. Okay, continue. Payment's really important. You would want to go through the process of listing your email address, who's the funds going to, and then you want to link it to your bank account. And this takes a couple of days for them to validate. So you want to do that process. And the final step is promotion. So Fis mentioned that you can get a pre-launch page. You can set that up here. The pre-launch page won't automatically have your Kickstarter go live. You don't have to worry about that. There's a whole big extra button that you have to click to say, I'm launching now. Your pre-launch page will let people start following you, and then they're notified once your project goes live. This isn't the number we started with. This is the project that the number that we have right now. You can also add in Google Analytics if you want to track how many people are on the page. Once you are live, there's a lot of tools that are available on Kickstarter that show you information. So you have a dashboard. Backer report lets you communicate with your backers and see who is there. The dashboard gives you general statistics of how much you've raised, what percentage are you at. You can track things over time. You can see where things are coming from. You can create specific tags. So if you want to make say a Facebook ad, you can create a specific link so then you can see where they're coming from. You have information about who's following the page, project views, which of your options are the highest. This is where your Google Analytics is. Activity shows you when people pledge, make comments, change comments. I won't show you that because that's backers information. And then the last part I'll show you is fulfillment, which if you click here, it gives you information about where all your backers are coming from, which is really important if you want to figure out where shipping is going to go. So for instance, most of ours are from the United States, followed by Canada and the US. So I'm most likely going to send everything to one warehouse versus splitting into different ones, and everything will ship from the States. You can also see from your pledge levels, which are the ones that have sold the most. And then from this, I can say, well, how many units have I sold? And then I can, in terms of manufacturing, okay, well, realistically, my number is close to about 400 to 500 units that I've sold. And I can use that to say, well, maybe I need to ask my manufacturer to do a higher print run than I expected. And that's pretty much the back end. So I'll stop sharing my screen now. There were one or two questions that I had written down that were earlier, so I'm quickly going to talk about that. So one question involved developing a reward system to get points or to level up, or to learn something to make it more interesting. An example of that is there's a game, a history-related game that Afisa, I know you bought that has to do with slavery. So I'll let you describe that one, which might be a good example to answer this question. The other one is making a participatory design, research on where people like to live, using the game to hear about people's reactions and thinkings to the style, making it simpler. What are some examples? And then there was the comment about making the Desi bridal shower one. So Feast, did you quickly want to talk about the first one about a reward system and the history slave game?
Yeah, so this will be, as you can see, there's a lot to cover, which is why we're kind of rushing. So Hamid, I apologize, I cut into your time. Danish, is it okay if we have 5 minutes for Q&A? Otherwise, what we can do is there's a few more slides left. We'll have those will be emailed over. We're going to share our email addresses as well if you want to reach out one-on-one. And if it's all right for us to spend another 5 minutes, we can do the Q&A, and then we'll add our contact information at the end. So I'm just going to quickly come back to that. So about developing a reward system to get points to move to the next level. There's a bunch of different games that do that different ways, where there's eras and you have to earn points. And then once that's done, you move to a different deck that you use. And there's things that happen in there. So the game Hamid reference is called Freedom, the Underground Railroad. That one's a really good one to check out as an example of how to do that. Seven Wonders is another good example of moving from one era to another. By using cards and unlocking things and using things in different ways. London does a really good job of that as well. So these are 3 examples of games that you can look up online. The second question was 2 objectives for me. Sorry, was that the one I made?
So make a participatory design research projects. I think this is more dealing with, you want to collaboratively help work on a game design. I might be misrepresenting what this question is, but how do you research, how do you get multiple opinions to hear what people think about what they would like, what gets them excited? So if you want to talk about that, one thing I can mention for mine are item cards, they're magic cards. The reason I created my campaign is because I wanted a specific type of magic item that didn't exist. And I got tired of looking for it. So I made my own. So mine is already live. So it's beyond, the general development stage, but a way that I created engagement to do something similar is I created polls where people could submit their own ideas and people could vote on them. And so I'm adding new items in through our stretch goals, but it's community driven and it's things that other people want, which is also a great way, 1, to build engagement, 2, to build excitement, and 3, to really lock in people that are going to be invested in your project. But you can do a lot of that stuff building in, and a lot of that will fall into play testing as well.
Yeah, getting involved in the community by joining Facebook groups is probably the easiest thing. Neither of us like Facebook, but we joined it specifically for that reason. We only really use it for that reason, that and the Facebook ads. So you'll need it eventually. There's a bunch that are out there. There's one called Board Game Spotlights, another one called Board Game Revolution. The Board Game Design Lab one is really good. And so there's a few of these that are out there. You can join them. You can see other people's questions. When you feel more comfortable, you can start adding your own. and people are really welcoming. It's really nice. It's like the opposite of
Reddit.
yeah, it's the opposite of Redditor. You know, sometimes people can be very competitive. In that space, it's this notion that a rising tide raises all ships. Everyone is supporting one another because the more people are interested in games, the more people are going to buy games, which just helps all game designers. So we would check out those. Just looking at the time, I'm just going to reshare our contact information real quick on the screen. So that way, if anyone wants to reach out to us, they are more than welcome to do so. So my email is hafiz.printer@gmail. Hamid's is hamid_printer@hotmail. We know that there was more questions in the comment box that we weren't able to get to, or sometimes questions will come up down the line about certain things. Feel free to reach out to either of us if you have questions about things. Again, this PowerPoint will be shared, so you'll have a breakdown of everything that we talked about and some of the slides that we didn't cover as well. So with that, we just want to both say thank you for joining us for this evening, running through all of this together. Again, it was a lot of information to get through very quick. So if we were speaking very quickly, it was just to make sure we gave you the most bang for your buck during this time. And with that, I guess we'll pass it back over to our host, Danish, to just finish it off. And thank you again so much for joining. We're getting lots of thank yous in the chat box. Oh, I don't know if Danish is there. I think it just does. So what we can do is we can take some questions until they boot us out, I guess. So if anyone does have any questions, you can unmute and you can just pose them, and we can use this space just to talk through a few of them. If you feel more comfortable sharing in the chat box, you can do that as well.
I'm also happy to go over the back end a little bit more. So one of the things that I found pretty daunting when I was getting into the whole Kickstarter thing was I didn't know what to expect when things launched, how things looked on, like all the tools that they give you in the back end, you don't have access to until you actually launch. So understanding what you do have available, I found to be really helpful. And I wish I had known some of that beforehand. So I'm happy to talk about that or go over some of the elements.
Yeah, so we'll open it up. We'll again keep an eye on the chat box if you prefer sharing there, or you can unmute and you can share that way as well. Hamid has also put the offer out, so if there aren't any questions, he can share a little bit more about the back end.
So, hi, this is Sharon Carson. So I actually started working on a game, and it's a board game version that we were always also simultaneously working on an app version. And the idea was to have it for the community with the intention that we teach about all the projects that the AKDN is doing, but bring it to the interfaith community as well, and the community at large. So I got to doing quite a bit of it. I have no background in gaming. I just felt that there was nothing during the Jubilee projects that was geared towards children, and I wanted to make this sort of an intergenerational project. So it was a game, and the idea was a memory game. Very basic, easy way to start for me. And I got to a point where I had also, I mean, everything is in place. I had a prototype, you know, I had the design and the sizing and everything done. I just needed like a graphic designer to help me pull it all together. And that's where I got stalled. And then, of course, sort of, I hate to use the word, but it was the bureaucracy of like getting through the permissions within the community, which was also going well. And you know, it was just finding somebody who had the time to be able to help me get over the finish line. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I'm really still interested in pursuing the project. I don't want to do it for the money or anything. It was intended to sell within the community and not make any profit out of it. Just wondering, just putting it out there, is there anybody who might be or might have done something similar that's interested in just collaborating or just kind of bouncing off some ideas to make this happen?
Yeah, I can make a suggestion, which is a little more left field, but it comes back to what you may be doing. So We're based in Toronto, and the city of Toronto puts out a lot of data under an open data platform. And one of the reasons they do that is transparency, but also it gives independent developers the ability to go in, pull large data sets and develop things. And so what I would do is I would, depending on if you, again, you said you might be looking for a graphic designer, I would look up open data projects in your city, because you can see what people have done with large data sets or specific types of data sets. And so you might find someone who, independently has built something and you like the way that they did it, either the interface or the design, and you can reach out to them if you're looking for someone to do that. And it might also give you ideas in the way to better present yours. So if everything's tuned the way you like it, that's great. But if you feel like, you may want to tweak things a certain way, then looking up open data projects is a good way to see ways that you can model your project. But then also, if there's a project that's based off of this that you really like, then you can reach out to the people involved and they might be able to help you too. So that's not really answering the question, but that's one thing that I would recommend that could be helpful.
So feel free to reach out to me. I was a former step teacher. I'm still with the Thread on the primary sides of things. So it's very exciting to hear that there's something about the AKDN. If it's something that's more intergenerational, geared towards, say, younger kids, but also good for older individuals, I'll take a look at a few examples of games that are out there that have maybe not the same element, but do have that matching element. So there's a few that come to mind. One is called Timeline. It's pretty small. It's pretty inexpensive. It's pretty good game. Spot It is another one. So is Go Splits. It's not exactly what you're looking for, but it'll give you a sense of what matching games look like, just to see what's popular, what's out there, what's been published. In regards to finding a graphic designer, I mentioned before, you have three things: control, time, and money. So you'll have control and time, but you may need to hire someone to then do the graphic design to then take care of that. If you have anyone within your network who may be interested in doing this as a side project, that could be something that you could look into. Otherwise, you may just need to invest some money into it. Just talking about Kickstarter, going back to Kickstarter right now, it's my game probably going to cost about $10,000 of sunk costs before the actual launch. So that's even before making any money, because illustrations are about $4,000. Graphic design is going to cost me about $1,000. Marketing, and a bunch of other things. So there is definitely a cost that is involved in that. Hamid mentioned earlier when we were talking about artists, looking at art colleges and reaching out to individuals that are trying to build their portfolio to say, hey, I have this project, I'm working on this, but it's a passion project. I don't have the most money. Would you be interested in doing it at a reduced fee, but something you can use in your portfolio? You may be able to find someone through that to help carry it over to the finish line.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I might reach out to you and just, go through a couple of other things that I was kind of stuck on. So I really, really appreciate you putting this session together.
Well, you're welcome. Oh, I should also mention there's a website that I said earlier, the Game Crafter. On there, you'd be able to possibly find someone who's able to do the graphic design. So they're made to do print-on-demand board games. So if you just wanted one or a few copies, they have a component studio. They have a lot of people that support on the back end to help. So if you make an account on there, you can ask, and you may have someone reach out. Going back to the Facebook groups, there are Facebook groups specifically for board game graphic design and art. You can post in there to say, hey, I'm looking for someone. This is what I'm looking at. A few people might reach out, and you can just have a conversation about what that would look like. But you may need to invest a bit of money into that.
I'm putting a link in the chat for a game called Monster Chase by Elio Games, which has a memory matching feel, which is pretty good. This one's really simplistic, but if you're looking, or if you're interested in checking out a game that might have a similar dynamic, I'd recommend that one.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hafiz, I'll send you an email as well.
Sounds good. And I think with that, we probably are running closely on time. No one has booted us out just yet, but we're still recording. So Notham, if you have any questions or anything you would like to talk to, we can do that. Otherwise, what we'll do is we'll just end off the session, and we'll just do another final round of thank yous.
Thank you all again for tuning in. Yeah, it was really nice to be able to talk about some of this stuff, because it was a little more condensed than we would have liked, but it's some of the information that we would have found helpful when we were starting out.
You know, it's great. I wish I had known you guys a couple of years ago. This would have been so helpful. But it's great. Nonetheless, it's still great. And, you know, it's a project that is sort of sitting there unfinished. I would love to see it come to fruition.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to see it on shelves soon. So
Okay.
with that, thank you everyone for joining, and have a lovely rest of the weekend.
Take care.